everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Hard Money Talk Show. I'm your host, Lauren Grootman, and I'm so glad that you are here today for another episode. I am so excited about today's episode with my wonderful guest, Caleb Williams. We're going to be talking about a bunch of things, but mostly we're going to be talking about money mindset. We're going to be talking about how we learn. We're going to hear from Caleb's story about how he went from homeschooled and with having trouble reading at the age of 13 to growing a multi-million-dollar wealth company. And then also, I have to say, this was the very first person that made me cry on the show. Caleb made me cry. Yep, that's true. So let's deep dive into money mindset and how the mindset of your money might be harming the way that you're handling your finances. So let's go talk to Caleb. All right, Caleb, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm glad to have you.
It is an honor to be here.
Yeah, super excited. So we're going to talk today about a couple different things, but the main thing, we're going to talk about two things. But I just think our conversation is kind of just going to be organic, right? But the main thing that I want to talk to you about is I know that you're 25. And you've always been kind of like, you're very successful in your business. Why don't we just back up? Why don't you tell people kind of you're a little bit about you and your success in the business world? Because I'm not going to do it justice. Yeah. I'll just put it that way.
So if people are watching right now, or if they saw my face, they'd be like, why am I learning from a 16-year-old child about anything in money? So I want to get that out of the way. I am extremely young looking, and trust me, I look a lot older now than I did 5 or 6 years ago. But my quick backstory was I grew up in central Wisconsin. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. My dad is a PhD molecular biologist, and in 8th grade, I wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to make money, and then I took biology. I was like, you know what? Probably not in my cards as it relates to following my dad's footsteps. My mom was a nurse, stayed home and homeschooled us. And so I kind of had a unique upbringing. To make a long story short, always been into money, worked at a chicken farm growing up and started making money for the first time, read The Richest Man in Babylon, which was very much of a door opener for me. Ended up getting a job at a bank when I was 17. And because I was homeschooled, I got to work on Mondays and Fridays, which are typically the busiest days at a bank. And just got to interact with people, learn how money works, got to work in different departments, wrote radio ads, worked in our investment department. And then my life changed pretty dramatically when, at the age of 19, the guy that was running our bank's investment department took another job. And I was the only one in the bank that was could step in because I was the assistant at the time. And so at 19 years old, I became one of the youngest people to take over that position. Had a corner office, had a bank phone. If you think banks are crazy, this just gives you way more reasons to not trust banks. And I just started off on this desire to help people with money. And the boss at the time gave me this really cliche statement. He said, Caleb, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. And thank God for Simon Sinek, because the Start With Why philosophy was so key. And so when people would come in, I knew nothing about money. And I would just get really clear on what is your why? Why do you do what you want to do? What is your goal? We call it retirement, but what do you actually want out of life? And then they would tell me, and then I would go and do my research after they left. And then the next meeting, I would help them with their money. But it was one of those kind of 1-2 punches. And so that translated into me learning a ton about efficiencies and investment strategies, and make a long story short, just really, really obsessed with the money space. And at the age of 21, ended up graduating college a year early, and really just had a heart-to-heart with myself and said, what is life all about? Knew that I wasn't going to be able to fulfill my mission of helping people see and reach their highest potential by staying at the bank. And so I did leave the bank, started Better Wealth, which is essentially a virtual financial planning firm, at 21, looking like I was 14. People, including my parents who loved me, they're like, I don't know if this is a great idea. You literally have it set. You have a corner office at a bank, credibility. And I was reading Think and Grow Rich for the second time. And one of the most powerful aspects of that book was your deeper root fear. And I realized that the deeper fear that I had was what people thought of me. And I actually feared poverty. And I think of just public shaming, I think. And so it was just one of those things where I knew by staying at the bank, I was not heading fear face on. And I knew that if I could get over that at a young age where I really had nothing to lose, that it would open up a door of just thinking differently and truly a life of abundance. And so left our first office at the time was $250 in the basement of a Papa John's building. So
You
not the
smell
most
pizza all
prestigious.
day.
No, like we literally were in the basement of a very, let's say, interesting building. And I say we because two other people believe in the mission of helping people just find a better way as it relates to money. And through there, wrote a self-published book, started a podcast, and started speaking. And made no money the first year, but then started making some money. And now we have a team, work with people in all 50 states. And I'm still young, but I'm like, it's crazy to think how crazy 4 or 5 years ago was. And like, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm just grateful for the people that believed in me. And I'm also grateful for the little bit craziness in my head to think that this was even possible.
Right. You look back and you're like, geez, why did I do that?
I'm like,
But yeah,
I wouldn't,
what
if
was I
knowing what I know
thinking?
now, I would have told myself not to do it. So I'm grateful. Ignorance is bliss.
Right. Okay. So there's a couple little nuggets of wisdom that I want to go back to. So the first one is the why aspect. I think that's so powerful because in all of the courses and trainings that I teach, I have a financial renovation community and I have this crush your debt course. And like in all of those things, the very first lesson before we get to any talking about money is always your why. Why do you want to do this? Because when days are bad, that's what's going to keep you going, and finances and money, like some people are really motivated by that, but really what they're motivated by is the end result, right? Is the peace that it gives them. It's the joy that it gives them. It's it's the family time it gives them. It's all of those things. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that's really an important piece. And then the second thing, which I love that you shared, was that you knew at a young age and you were self-aware enough to say, I know that I'm afraid. And if I don't do this now, I'm probably never going to do it. Like I'm probably going to be stuck afraid the rest of my life in this corner office job, which I know I'll be okay with, but that's not the abundant life that I want. Right. And that is a bold, courageous move right there.
One of the things that I got to experience at a young age was one of my best friends, actually the guy that helped me start Better Wealth, died with cancer and left 3 kids under the age of 18. And he was like a second father to me. We would meet even before the business was started. We'd meet and talk about school and business ideas and girls and all that stuff. And so I got to see one of my best friends like die. And one of his last words to me was like, and he was all about intentional living, but he was just like, don't forget the reason why we started Better Wealth to begin with. And so a lot of times people are like, Caleb, like you're kind of an old soul deal. And I feel like I have perspective knowing that in 100 years, I'm going to be dead. and like, I don't see that as like depressing. I see that as like, wow, like we have only a limited time on this earth. It's like a miracle that we're born if you think about the odds. And so like it's such a blessing, and yet most people are walking around, never have asked themselves once what they truly want. No one has ever given them the permission to truly live. And in a sense, I feel like a lot of people are living to a fraction of what they could be living to on other people's terms. The other thing that I want to say that it registered at a young age for me is ROR in the financial planning world is rate of return. And isn't it crazy that most people determine their entire life, their entire investment philosophy based on what Wall Street is saying? This is important, rate of return. This mutual fund will be better than this index fund, whatnot, if it can get a better rate of return. And we just reverse that ROR as in return on result. And so all we would do essentially, even before we knew anything about money, is what do you actually want? Make that the metric, not some retirement metric. Let's not make the 4% rule the end all be all. Let's make what do you truly want out of life, and then audit your time, audit your relationships, audit your resources, audit your talents, and figure out a way to get that. And maybe you don't have to wait till 65, 70. And so even like that, it's again, like people are like, oh, you think so differently about money. I'm just, maybe my blessing was I got to learn about money and didn't get trained by a typical internship program through college. And so I just started thinking like, man, no one has ever been asked what they want. And this is resonating with people. It's like, yeah, that actually make sense. And so, sorry for getting me on a rant, but I love talking about this stuff, and I love how we're both aligned with the why.
No, and you know what? I just teared up, and you're the first guest that's made me cry on this show because you just stirred something up in me of just like hearing your friend that passed away and realizing like that our time is so short, right? And we can spend our entire life stressed about retirement and our money and making good financial decisions that we miss out on what's happening right now. And I am like such a huge proponent of that. And I am so incredibly grateful for the career that I have, that I've been able to go through a divorce and be home with my kids and like be financially stable and be able to continue to give back to my community of women that have followed me for 12 years, you know, and I that really like teared me up because I'm the same way. Like I'm going to live each day like it's my last, and I'll be damned if I'm unhappy. So like to find those ways in our life, whatever it is, if you have to leave your job to go and find something else and fulfill that need, you know. And I actually, the very first podcast episode that I did was with Shane Sams, and we talked about how he quit his job because his son was getting abused in daycare, and how he had to make that like flip decision of like like I cannot quit. I cannot do this. Like this is my son. I can't. So he quit his job as a school teacher, and it's like those hard money decisions where we have to make, and what's next, right? So like that is so powerful, that lesson.
Can I share one other thing that just kind of so Warren Buffett is over the age of 90, and he's worth a lot of money, over $100 billion. And yet, if I asked you to trade places with him, you would say no. If I asked most of your audience, would you trade places with Warren Buffett? They would say no. Why? Because on a macro level, we value our time. And so what I essentially just proved to you is you value your time more than billions and billions of dollars. And yet what's interesting is on a micro level, we devalue our time every day. And so I share that because life is an incredible blessing, and time is a resource that ends every day. And it's just one of those things where it puts in perspective because I love the idea of building wealth. And yes, we could talk all day long about wealth strategies. And at the same time, I never want to lose perspective. And one of the exercises that we do with our clients is we have them write their name down. We help them craft their why statement, their mission statement. And then we simply have a box of 100 boxes, each box representing a year of your life. And a lot of times you start filling. And for some of the people that work with us, I mean, their 3/4 boxes are filled up. And again, we don't do this to say like, oh, woe is you. It's just a really, really good example of like, wow, I'm 25 and it went fast. And so people listening to this can relate whether you're 15 years old or whether you're 55 years old. Like, man, that went fast, but it helps you realize like, why was I stressing out about all the things that didn't matter? So all in all, like this is a really fun podcast. I don't get to talk about this stuff a lot because a lot of people are so tactical. But I really, really appreciate this platform and just your willingness to go down hard money conversations.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, right? And I think about like with everything that happened with the pandemic, and people were not planning on getting sick and all of that. Like one of my daughter's previous teachers, she she actually just passed away a little while ago from COVID. And she was like the brightest. My kids used to go to like a private Christian school, and she was like the brightest shining star ever. She was like the most amazing lady, and all she wanted was to get married and have kids. Like that was her lifelong goal. She finally found like the man of her dreams. They got married, and she wanted to be a mom, so they got pregnant like right away. And she like quit her job at the school, and she stayed home so that she wouldn't get COVID. She ended up getting it somehow. And she went and like started she went and got she got like pneumonia and ended up, they had to take the baby at 30 weeks and then she died like a couple hours later. And it's like, you can't plan that. So how do we learn, how to be present in the moment with what we're doing with our finances, right? And there's this whole fire movement of retire, go crazy 10 years of your life so you can retire the next 40. Yep. And I love that movement because I love what it represents, but also like I literally feel retired now.
Yeah, I love that.
I can design my life the way that I want to. Like I take summers off. I have a camper and a boat and kayaks, and me and my kids travel.
I love it.
And like, that's the life that I want.
Yeah.
But it took sacrifice to get here. It took 80-hour weeks. It took a couple years of busting my butt to get to where I am, and nursing while typing and having babies. And it put strain on my marriage and probably led a lot to, the end of that relationship. I mean, that wasn't everything, but so there was sacrifice to get to where I am. And that's hard to admit, that's definitely hard to admit, but I love my life today. And I would not trade it for the world. All of those hard things that I've had to go through to design the life that I want today, so that I don't, I don't get to my deathbed and say like, I wish I would have paid off that last credit card.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I want to say, I'm glad I went on that vacation. I'm glad that I spent that time with my kids. And I had this conversation with one of my best friends the other day, because she was like, I have like $5,000. Should I pay off this credit card or should I go on this vacation that I promised my kids? And I'm like, go on the vacation. You can do both. You can go on the vacation, pay cash and pay off the credit card. But I just teach a different way, like you, I just teach a different way of finance because life is too short to be stressed.
It's interesting. The word retirement, I think, is a really toxic word. That's my only critique with the FIRE movement. I love the FIRE movement as well, but it's like, let's get retirement out. Like one of the best definitions of retirement is to be taken out of service. I truly believe some of the most fulfilled people are constantly serving. One of my favorite quotes is, the value of your life is always measured by how much of it was given. There's this strange thing that happens when we give of ourselves. And when at my funeral, no one's going to say like, oh, this person, Caleb, won this award and this award, this award. They're going to talk about the experiences that we gave of each other. And so just one of those things that it's just like, okay, let's instead of the word retirement, what we use is intentional living. That's like my financial freedom metric, is if you can live life intentionally. So, Robert Kiyosaki, have enough cash flow to cover your expenses. We just shift that and say, have enough cash flow to live intentionally. And intentional living for me may look a lot different than it is for you. But what's interesting is when you actually look at what truly matters, it's not millions of dollars. It's like, man, like we could actually live intentionally for X, which might be totally different, which might mean moving out of the city into a different state. It might mean quitting a job. It might mean, it might mean a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, like, who am I to say this is how you should live? You should figure that out. What does an intentional living look like? And you are actually financially free when you have enough cash flow, not passive cash flow, because it might be intentional for you to make some active cash flow. I don't know, but have enough cash flow to live intentionally. And if you can be living life on your terms, that is the ultimate goal in life. And the goal is not to wait to 65, but how amazing if you could do that soon, like really soon. And a lot of times when people go through this exercise, they realize these are the things that are most important. And I'm either not living intentionally or I'm living way more intentionally. And I'm feeling the shame because I'm not, where I need to be in my 401k. But at the end of the day, who knows? We could go down a lot of rabbit holes, but who knows what the next 30, 45 years look like? And I would just be skeptical of that anyways.
Right. And there was this quote, and I'm going to reference back to Shane's podcast again, because it's just fresh in my mind, that he said that anytime you use the word should in your vocabulary when we're talking about money, it's somebody else's opinion of what you should be doing. right? So if you say this is what I want to be doing, then that's your opinion and your intentional living, value. If you say like, oh my gosh, I should have so much more money in my 401k right now. Well, who told you that? Right. And so there's those conversations that we go on in our head that we need to kind of reframe, but it's like, so in my community, I do a weekly support group for the people in my community where we sit and we go on Zoom and we talk like this, like, what are you struggling with today? And I don't record it because I want it to be a safe place for women to come. And we talk about like these hard things. Like, I'm struggling because I grew up in a poor house and I'm really struggling with spending money because it's either all or nothing. And, we dig into these kind of like really difficult money conversations that nobody else is having in their life. Right. And what I find is that so much of these conversations are coming up based on conditioning, right? Of what we were brought up with and raised. So let's go back to a little bit of that. Cause before we started talking, you were talking about how you were raised and you were homeschooled and all that kind of stuff. So was that a challenge for you? Cause you said you
Yeah.
weren't raised like in an entrepreneurial kind of
No,
family.
yeah, but being homeschooled, so I'm 25, so being homeschooled 20 years ago, you just automatically have to think a little bit differently because it was a lot weirder than it is now. I'll just put it that way.
Okay, so
Um,
before we get started, I just have to say that I just pulled my 7th grade daughter from public school this week to homeschool her.
okay. Yeah, I mean,
Because it was like, we're not doing this anymore.
yeah.
And she was
If
literally begging, like,
yeah,
please. So like
li-
I'm a little like, I don't know what I'm doing, but it's all online.
if you want to have me back on, we could talk all about homeschooling. It's a huge passion of mine, and if we end up having kids, I just got married 7 months ago. Homeschooling is going to be the way that we approach the schooling topic. But overall, my parents just had this conviction, like, of, hey, I think we can just do a better job. We want to spend time with our kids. It was again, they wouldn't necessarily articulate it as intentional living, but it was just one of those things that they wanted to do it for multiple reasons. And one of the things I'm grateful for is when I was 13 years old, I still had a hard time reading. Dyslexia, whatever you want to call it, it's really, really tough for me to comprehend in reading. When I try to read, words get mixed up. And I was like the oldest, and so I was very self-aware, and I literally thought I was stupid. And I remember one moment where I was like in front of everybody. I forgot like what I was supposed to say, and like we were doing some type of skit. For some reason, I had like a note card that I wrote down with my terrible handwriting, and just this moment of like sounding out every single word in front of like all my peers at 13 years old was like horrible. And I went home to my mom the next day, and I was frustrated because I was super short. My younger sister was taller than me, so I was insecure there. Learning was difficult for me, and I thought I was dumb. And my mom just said something, again, really cliche. She said, Caleb, the things that you can't control, like your height, don't worry about. Like, your identity is not in something that you can't control. But the things that you can control, like, she leaned right in and said, like, you're reading, it's hard for you, but like, you just need to work harder. And I truly believe that mentality of grit. Now, now there's a lot of people talking about the power of grit, but like, that was instilled in me at a young age. My dad, who's not a entrepreneur, but was an executive for, a vitamin company and did a lot of research, hated when we were working. He hated when I would sit around or stand around. I would get yelled at if I just waited to be told what to do. And so again, I didn't love working with my dad growing up, but now I'm thinking like, my dad taught me to be proactive. And now we're in a world of many people are waiting for that opportunity or waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And I was never programmed that way. And if you look at like how I got my first job, how I moved up at the bank, how I took over the bank's investment department at 19, how we started betterwealth.com, it was one of those things where I got lucky, but I increased my luck surface by just meeting people and working hard. And it was just one of those things that was just ingrained in me. And so I'm a big fan of that. Just the environment growing up. Cameron Harold has a phenomenal TED Talk on why I raise my kids as entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I wish I was programmed more is I wish I could have had the permission to fail. I so wish I had the permission to fail forward and learn how to sell and learn how to like be more proactive as it relates to that. Because even though we were homeschooled, we did it very much the traditional way. And now that I'm realizing and look back, I'm like, man, if you can teach your kids to have high self-confidence and be able to fail forward and know that that failure or that grade doesn't determine who they are, you're actually going to give them a superpower, because you could say that schools teach us to follow directions, really don't ask questions because you'll be made fun of if you ask a ton of questions. And so they're almost like beating creativity and entrepreneurship out of your children and teaching them how to just follow, like get in line and follow the rules. And I'm not saying none of that's like, some of that stuff is good, but some of the creativity and proactiveness are literally is what is going to give your kid the it factor. And so last thing I'll say is, what are the things that truly are important? I love that I learned math and science and all those things. And trust me, you want to learn that. But at the end of the day, what are the things that are really important? Like money, like financial literacy, like character skills, like the ability to truly communicate, understand EQ. And I've just found that a lot of the school system is not focused on that as much as, math, science, algebra, geometry. And again, it's just one of those things that now being more self-aware, I'm going to be more intentional if someday I have children, to make sure that they're getting a well-balanced education, not just in math and science, but also the EQ, money skills, being able to communicate. They're going to be selling soap door to door, or it's doing something, learning how to get with rejection and all of that, because I think that just will build your kid up to be a really self-confident, empathetic person.
If you started 2022 with more debt than you'd like to have, you're not alone. Debt.com is here to help. Whether you still have holiday credit card debt to pay off or student loan payments are starting to build up again. Maybe you even have debt collectors that are hounding you for payments you just can't make. The experts at Debt.com can help. Finally, one website can help you solve your debt problems. Credit cards, back taxes, student loans, medical debt, collections, you name it, Debt.com can help you solve it. And they do it with no judgments, because they understand that when people end up in debt, it's usually for things outside their control, like job loss or divorce or some other hardship. So if you're in debt, visit laurengrutman.com/debt to get the relief you need, or call 888-431-2044 to get a free consultation with a debt relief specialist. Find solutions to get out of debt, fix your credit, and get on the path to achieving your financial goals. When life happens, visit Debt.com. I totally agree with that. And I think, having an entrepreneurial mom for my kids has always given them the permission to like think outside the box. Cause I'm like, you guys don't have to settle. Like, and my son is a junior in high school, and he still is like, I don't know if I want to go to college. And I'm like, well, then let's think of a business idea, and he makes these like custom keyboards. And I'm like, why don't we start a course? You can teach teenagers how to make custom keyboards. He's like, nobody would buy that. I'm like, yeah, they would. They totally would. Anybody can buy anything. So I'm always, thinking outside the box for them. And so with my daughter, pulling her from school, there was just so many situations where I'm just like, this is not working for her. And she's so smart and like self-motivated. She was like, please. So we pulled her, and we'll be homeschooling her. Thankfully, my ex-husband's fiance, soon to be wife, homeschools her kids. So she's like a great asset. So she knew exactly what to do, which was really helpful. And so I totally agree. I totally agree with that. And I can kind of see the other girls following suit, and when they get to middle school, because it's just a hot mess. It's just a hot mess. I'll tell you that much. But I love what you said about the making mistakes part, right? I think a lot of people are afraid to make any sort of financial move because of fear of failure. And what I've found in my life, I always say that, like, I'm not really afraid of failing. I'm kind of like a true entrepreneurial, like I've failed a lot in my business. I'm afraid of not trying. That's my fear. Okay. I don't know. like my dad was an executive with like General Electric, with the state of New York. He was the head of information technology. I was raised around computers. I remember as a little kid, like taking apart telephones, and he would like show me how to put them back together. Like, so my brain has always been like, solve a problem. Like, let's figure out something and solve a problem. And I've always been really good with computers. So I was raised on the internet, even though I'm 40. Like, I was raised on the internet. Even like we had probably one of the first computers in the history of computers, right? Like,
Awesome.
um, and so for some reason, I just have always had this entrepreneurial spirit. And I think it came from him because he was always like thinking we should do this or we should start this. And he never did it, but he was always dreaming and thinking. And that gave me kind of the ability to dream, gave me the permission to dream, to think big. And he's like my biggest fan, and that's a great thing between me and my dad. I think at the beginning of life and the beginning of entrepreneurship for me, I had fear because I was afraid of what people would think about me. I was afraid of going into debt. I was afraid of being in the public spotlight and something happening. I'll tell you this much: it was not pretty going through a divorce in the public spotlight because he was a big part of my business, and that was hard for me. But I learn the best in the valleys of life. I don't learn in the mountaintop. When I'm in the mountains of life and I'm in good times, I tend to forget that I'm not in control of my life. And I'm a spiritual person. I'm a person that has faith, and I take my own will back and I just go with it. So I learn the best in the valleys, and I know that you've had some experiences with that as well. So like what has happened like in your journey? I know you've had some valley kind of experiences, and you said that you have struggled with that, like you were afraid of failing. So how did you get over that?
I mean, multiple different versions. I think the business valley that I found myself in actually very early on in Better Wealth, just happened to be an investment that went poorly, and it was my fault. And I made the decision when we had like $20,000 in the bank. I'm living at home, and just by the way, thinking of fear of failure. Try writing a book on money living at home. It messes with your brain, and you're like, man, if I write this and I fail financially, like I feel like I'm giving like people fuel to just make fun of me. And then I realized like most people don't spend time thinking about me anyways, and so it's totally fine. But I had to be okay with the consequence if you're going to go show up powerfully in whatever you pursue. But anyways, we started Better Wealth, and I wanted to show people a better way, and there was so many good things about it. And one of the clients from the bank came to me and just said, "Hey, Caleb, like I want to use a little bit of money and invest differently." And so I connected them with a group that tended to be, in hindsight, was a horrible decision. I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't do research, and this company failed, went under, and as a result, my friend lost $25,000. Now, thank God it was only 25,000. At the time, I had $20,000 in the bank. Okay, and when I heard that news, I knew immediately that I had to pay him back. And it was one of those feelings that was, I can't even explain it. It was just, um, it was so frustrating and like devastating. And yet, like, I made the decision and I knew like that was the right thing to do. And so through that time, I've learned a couple things. I learned number one, due diligence is a real thing. I don't believe people at face value anymore. Not from I'm not a depressed person that's like, prove it to me. I just like realize that just because a statement is made doesn't make it real. And I don't get triggered by what people say, good or bad. I'm way more neutral. But then I also realized like, when I made that decision, I became bulletproof. When I made that decision to pay him back, I realized that whether the world knows this or not, because I've only shared this once or twice, I don't really in public with this thing that happened in my life. But when that happened, I realized like, okay, we are going to design our business around integrity. And number one, we're not going to just do things for a quick buck, because I can't fall asleep at night knowing that people are not in a better financial situation because of me, good or bad. And so it was
Right.
just one of those things that through that, it really helped me. And I would just say since that time, it's made me way more trustworthy and allowed me to have better connections with clients, because early on I was, even though I would tell you I'm not about selling, I was like, that's how I made money. And so I was just like, all right, finding the different strategies, and I was way more aggressive from a standpoint of like sharing the optimism. And now there's a downside to almost anything that you can choose. And I've just found that I would much rather be the person that lays out the neutral, like, here are the pros, here are the cons, and don't sue me if this doesn't work out. And oh, by the way, like, people tend to trust you a lot more when you're able to be authentic and real. And so, all in all, like, whether it was being 13, having my younger sister that was taller than me and not being able to read and wondering if I was ever going to get through college, to, working at the bank, end up leaving the bank, which ironically was a really tough decision because it was family to me, or whether it was some of the mistakes early on that almost took us under. It was one of those things I look back and I'm like so grateful. And those are the times that you grow the most, because on the peaks of the mountain, it's perspective again. And so thank you for allowing me to share that. And I don't know if you have any follow-up questions, but it was definitely I hope never to relive that, but I'm also really, really grateful that it was only 25,000 and it was early on. And I think I'm going to be a better investor for the next 50 to 100 years because of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I appreciate you sharing that story, because I know sharing stories like that is not easy. I've come out with a couple stories on the podcast where I'm like, this is the first time I'm sharing this, but that shows so much um, incredible integrity and trustworthiness, right, in your business, to be able to go to sleep at night. And there have been many times in my 12 years of running my company where I've said, nope, not doing that. Not working with this company. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that, because it goes against my values. It's not going to help my clients. It's not going to help the people that read my website and all of that. And I'm just not going to sign up for that. And leaving tens of thousands of dollars on the table. And that those kind of decisions are hard, but we have to go to bed at night and be okay with who we are as people, right? And that to me is worth more than money.
100% agree. And when I said that I felt bulletproof, is I was like, I was never, ever, ever going to let a quick buck change the integrity or change the direction of the company. And now we have 15 people that work for Better Wealth. And early on in business, my fear was, would I be able to make money and feed myself? And now it shifts to like, oh, we have families. We have families that are supporting their livelihood based on Better Wealth. If as a leader, now my consequences are even greater. So it's just one of those things where, yeah, when it comes to just integrity, and I think there's some people that need to hear this because they're potentially entering into relationships, they're promoting products, they might be even working or selling for a company that they don't really believe in. And I would tell you that is a horrible place to be. And I think a lack of financial literacy actually sometimes makes us be in those places, because if you are financially free, which remember is living intentionally, then you don't necessarily have to compromise. And so that would be one of the things that I would just plea for you and your audience, is to get really clear and don't have friction or be a part of something that you don't truly believe, because you're going to wonder why you have anxiety or health problems, or maybe you're anxious. A lot of times it's that deeper root stuff going on because we're backing, or we're endorsing something that is really not going to better the people that we love the most.
It's so true. And so I'm going to share a little story too. I haven't shared this. I shared this in my book, but I haven't shared this on the podcast yet. That one of the things that got me into so much debt when I was in $40,000 worth of debt was I was in an MLM called Mary Kay. Okay. And hopefully they don't sue me for this story. We'll see what happens. But so I joined Mary Kay back in I was pregnant with Andrew. So it was 2004. I joined Mary Kay, because my friend joined and I was like, oh, I can make like, you know, I was working as a drug and alcohol counselor, which by the way, same situation. Like I always get told like, you're 40, like you look a lot younger than you are. I was like 23, 24 counseling as a drug and alcohol counselor. And I looked like I was like 18. And I was counseling like these 80, you know, 40, 50, 67-year-old men at night and trying to get them sober and clean. And they were like, who are you? Like, you look like a teenager, you know? But so I was counseling and then I was doing Mary Kay on the side. Well, after like being in the company for probably about 6 months, they try to almost get you to like sign other people up underneath you and then put inventory orders underneath those people so you can get your free car, right? And I kind of like fell into the trap of that. And within like a year of being in the company, I won my free pink Cadillac within a year of the company. And a lot of it was because of the way that the person above me showed me how to earn it, you know? And there's so much that goes on in those type of companies. And I always had this gut feeling of like, this is not right. This is not the right way to do it. And a lot of my debt came from doing that, you know? And so when I finally quit the company, I was in $40,000 worth of debt. Not all from that. There were other things. When they came, I had to call the company because I had the pink Cadillac in my driveway. I had to call the company and say, I want you to come can I come and like meet you and like at a gas station to like, so you can come pick the car up, right? Because like I was too embarrassed to have them come pick the car up at my house. And they're like, no, we have to pick it up at your home. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like, I'll meet you at this address. And I tried to give them like a gas station address and they refused to pick it up. They had to pick it up at my house. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. So they come down the street with like, I lived in like a suburban, like small neighborhood with like literally like a Mack truck that you can like put like 10 cars on, right? Like for my little car. And it caused such a scene that like all the neighbors came out of their house and like the pink Cadillac gets repoed. And like, it was just so like, there was so much shame attached to that. And I tried to play the role for so long, right? Keep up the role of like, of that. And I think there was this documentary that came out called Lula Rich. And actually, I'm going to interview one of the girls on the documentary on the podcast because she's a friend of mine. And it's all about how LuLaRoe, like this clothing company, you know, got rich by using, I don't know if you want to call it illegal methods or whatever, but getting all their people to buy inventory and putting inventory on other people and all that kind of same situation. Mm-hmm. And how much debt these women were in, same situation, and how like women lost their homes and all of that. And if you don't believe in what you're doing, if you don't feel like you can go to sleep at night and you're trying to convince yourself that you're doing the right thing, that's the key. Like I would try to convince myself that I'm happy. Like nope, you're doing a good thing. You're helping people feel better about themselves. You're enriching women's lives. No, you're not. You're going into debt and you're putting yourself, you and your family into a worse financial situation. That was the reality of it. For the quick buck. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And that was a long time ago. That was like 17 years ago, you know? But again, I learned that lesson in the valley, not on the mountaintop, right? So it's so true that money and integrity and mindset, they all go together.
And you know where it's built all around is where we get validated. Mm-hmm. I think about that. Yep. Early on in your story, and again, I'm not going to insert anything into your story other than where it sounded like you were validated by other things, not just yourself.
Right. Oh, exactly. I was validated by the sales, by the you're doing well, by this, you know, status. Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Totally. So what makes, you know, external validation, that's a dangerous thing, right? If you are looking for external validation, with your job, maybe that can be a tricky thing as well. And
Yeah.
that's at the point of my life I was at, is it felt good to be like, you're
Yeah.
doing a great job.
I mean, I would encourage everybody listening to this, what is your true validation or what validates you? Even recently, this is something that I've been working on, is I realized that, okay, I'm now getting validated by success in business and all other things. And I'm like, man, like that can be horrible too. It's like it's just different levels. And until you are it really only two levels. It's either you validate yourself or a higher power validates you. That is again true freedom. And so one of the things that I start doing is when like people ask you like, oh, what do you do? Or I just, it just depends. And I'm just gonna say I do financial advising. And again, like early on, I would like, talk all about business and all that stuff. And why? Because I felt better about myself explaining that I started a business when I was 21 and owned betterwealth.com. No, it was just like I realized that I wasn't doing it to help them. I was doing it to increase my status. And it was just like, again, levels and levels of self-awareness. I'm realizing like, wow, we're just all need to be validated on different levels. And the true people that I have the most respect for don't need a single person to validate them. And that is true power, because when you can live freely without other people, like then you can actually give of yourself and not ever have that filter of being like, constantly second guessing yourself. And so it's just one of those things that sparked in my mind as you talk about your story. And I appreciate you sharing that because it's super relatable for myself personally, and I'm sure for so many people.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because that's been my journey the past 4.5 years since my divorce from the kid's father has been, where does your worth come from? Right? Where does your value come from? And a lot of times my value used to come from external things. And when I was writing my book, I really was looking at, okay, my external things a lot of times came from things like the purchases that I used to make, the way that I looked, the way that the people I had in my life that, if they validated me, if they thought what I did was cool or whatever. And I used to, like, people would ask me what I did and I'd be like, I go on TV for a living. And I'm like, you know what, Lauren, like just tone it down. Like nobody cares, right? Because I don't go on TV for a living. That's like a side thing that I do for fun. What I do for a living is I teach people how to get out of debt and budget. So now I teach people that I run a personal finance social media company. And they're like, okay, like no questions. I don't need the validation of anybody because I'm whole on the inside now. Right. So I've been through years of therapy of trying to figure that out so that I don't need to shop to fill that up. I don't need to drink to fill that up. I don't need to, date to fill that up. I don't need to be a workaholic anymore to fill that up, because that was something, years ago to get to where I am. Like I could totally do that as well. Um, I feel full and validated by myself, um, and that's a beautiful place to come to, and it's that mindset piece where where we can learn, but again, we learn from the valleys. I never, every time I'm on a mountaintop, I'm just like, okay, when are we going down? Because I know I'm going to learn from that. But then other times I'm like, okay, God, I'm ready to like stop making some valley moves. Like, can't we just stay on the mountaintop a little bit longer? Because I'm like, I'm kind of enjoying it up here.
Well, and that I'll just say one other thing is if you're ever feeling on the mountaintop and want to have a different perspective change, just think of your death. And again, I don't say that in a depressing way. I just say like it every great empire will fall. I mean, Warren Buffett will die. And that is the most, and he's going to leave with nothing. So it's just one of those things where it's like, regardless, I mean, my hope is that you don't have to constantly be in the valleys, but it's like, perspective needs to shift.
Well, the valleys are like smaller now, they're not like this. Like they're like, oh, like I had a bad day because I didn't fold my laundry. You know what I mean? Like they're not as big as they used to be, thank God. But But I think that the mindset piece, I mean, we've gone so many different directions in this call, but I think that the main general consensus is like mindset and then being present with what we're doing, right? And then learning, because like if we don't learn from our mistakes, right? I feel like that we're just going to keep making them over and over again. And I know I've done that with my money for years. Like, why do I keep on doing the same thing over and over again? What is that? The definition of insanity, right? And doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So how do we make that change? So when you're working, as we wrap up this talk, like as you're working with a client and they're having problem with their mindset maybe and struggling in some areas, like what are some, you seem to have so many like little, like so many good nuggets of wisdom. Like what are some good parting nuggets you can leave us with?
Recently, my wife is obsessed with sleep, and I was never really like I'd never really got it, and then I got an Aura ring, and the Aura ring, for those of you that are not familiar with that, it just essentially tracks like everything about your sleep and gives you a score and shows you what's going on. And now I'm like, you could call me like a mini biohacker because I'm like, I care a lot more. And so, really, if you want to get your money thing figured out, there's two things that are vital. Number one is get really clear on what do you value and what is the goal. Please don't make it a something that you read off the internet and say, oh, this is my goal. Like, figure out if money wasn't an issue, what would you be doing? Who do you want to spend time with? What do you truly value? If this, one of my favorite questions asked, if this is your last day on earth, like what would you make sure to share with the people that you love the most? Like do that work and figure out what is important to you. A lot of people go through their entire life not doing that, by the way. So do that. And then the second thing is you have to figure out a way to then audit what you're currently doing. And when it comes to money, so it's a super fascinating podcast that we're doing because I haven't talked about one tactical thing about money, which is rare. Like if people would be shocked if
That's
they
what,
listen to
I
this.
said, I'm like, we're not talking about money, Caleb. Like
Right,
we're talking about like the deep stuff under the money. That's what
right.
we're talking about today.
What's interesting is if you take a dollar bill, okay, a dollar bill is literally just currency, and it's actually debt that the Fed prints. Okay, it's just a debt instrument. So what's interesting is money could care less about that. But one of the things that is important is cash flow. If you really think about it, businesses in personal life, like cash flow needs to continue to flow. If we don't have any cash flow, bad things will happen. Businesses will shut down, and eventually people will like go broke if they don't have cash flow coming in. And so it really is get really clear on what you want, and then from a cash flow perspective, audit what you're currently doing and figure out what that cash flow number needs to be to live the life that you want. And at the end of the day, it's that simple. I mean, there's other things like looking at your income and looking at where you're consuming your money and doing tax strategy and investment strategy. But at the end of the day, all that comes from knowing what you want, auditing, and we do audits around cash flow ratio because at the end of the day, I believe cash flow is the most important financial metric as it relates to our money. And it's that simple. So do the hard work in to quote Alice in Wonderland when she was at the fork in the road and the cat was like, where do you want to go? And she said, I don't know. And the cat literally said, if you don't know where you want to go, any road will get you there. It would be a shame. It would be a shame if people live their life like that. And so a lot of clarity comes when you know where you want to go. And then the money side becomes a lot easier because then we just customize it on where you want to go.
As a part of my financial renovation community that I have a Voxer group, right? Yeah. And so I actually sent this Voxer out to my group this morning. And it says, resetting my values helped me realign my spending. And it was just really simple quote, right? Of when we reset the values, it just like it just happens automatically because everything is seen through the eyes of our values. Like suddenly that nice brand new car that we spend $500 a month on doesn't become as important when you realize that that $500 car is keeping you from the life that you want. It just like, we got to get rid of it because it's keeping me from what I really want. Right. So yeah, like when we reset the values of our life, it just automatically resets the spending. It's like, it's crazy. It just happens. Oh man, this has been such, I give you the trophy for the first guest to make me cry.
I take that with honor, by the way. So thank you.
I
It's been
seriously
an
was like,
honor being on here.
yeah, this has been awesome. And I'm glad that I got you to talk about not money, but actually money, that this is the stuff that I love to talk about, from a counselor background. Like, we can talk about finances and money and investments and stuff all day, but if we don't deal with the mindset stuff behind it, it's hard to stay on track. It's really, really hard. And I think that's why so many Americans are stuck, because we're stuck in our heads, and we're stuck, like you said, like living the life that we don't want. And I'll be damned if I live a life and I'm on my deathbed and I say, I wish I had done more.
It's interesting because I was going to say this earlier to you. It's very, very clear to me that regret scares the hell out of you. And it does for me as well. And it's just one of those things where it's like, I do not want to regret anything in my life. And that was actually the catalyst, of why I left at 21 to do this. It was like, okay, life is good. I've always loved every day. It's just one of the things that I'm grateful for. So I wasn't like unhappy at the bank. I just was like, I'm going to regret if I don't do this. And so thank you for being such a good example of that in your community. Think about the ripple effect that you're able to have on people that are having the courage to have that conversation, quit that job, do whatever they need to do, and the ripple effect they're having on their family and their community. It really is amazing when you think about nowadays how we can leverage value and authenticity in a way that 60 years ago was just practically impossible. And so a great time to be alive.
Yeah, it really is. And you know what? I always think about, if it doesn't work out, nothing's permanent except the big tattoo on my shoulder. I got that. Kind of regret that. That is kind of permanent, but oh well. I still like it, but that I only live once, so I'll die with the tattoo, and that's okay. So, well, thank you so much for being on here. I know that this added a lot of value to my life, and I think that it'll add a lot of value to everybody who tuned in to the show today. So why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
Our website is betterwealth.com. You can email me at caleb@betterwealth.com. And if there's anything that I can do for your audience, we have a bunch of checklists. So if you email me and want checklists, I'll email you some helpful checklists that we use in our financial practice. And then not huge on social media, but I will be starting this year. So hold me accountable to that. And it's just my first and last name, Caleb Williams. And I'm just so grateful to be here. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the future holds. And I have a funny feeling that there's going to be a lot of synergy going forward.
Yep, definitely. Thank you so much. All right. What a powerful podcast that was. I mean, I can't believe I cried. I can't believe I cried because I'm a crier, but I am so appreciative to Caleb for coming on the show. I think that podcast episode was so powerful for me, just to really even just think about the mindset and the why behind we do everything that we do, why I do everything that I do. And so I hope that you were touched and it gave you some things to think about today. What is the why? How do you want your life to play out? How do you want to live your life? And then make your spending a reflection of those values. Make your income a reflection of those values. I know that I had to make some really tough decisions with my income over the past couple of years. And I'm so thankful that I have the career that I have and that I can live the life that I wanted to live. But it didn't come without sacrifice. And I think he made an interesting observation about how I don't want to live with regret. And I think a lot of that has been tied around the fact that I see life as precious. And I know that life is only given once. And I have 4 children, and I want to give them everything that I've got. And so If I have to make some mistakes along the way, I'm willing to do it. So thank you for spending the hour with me and Caleb today. It means a lot to me, it means a lot to Caleb. For all of the show notes on today's podcast, to find Caleb, you can go to laurengrootman.com/podcast. All right, I'll see you next week. Bye.